It is a great pleasure to be part of this event on the impact of machine learning and artificial intelligence on the UK economy, and in particular to have been asked to chair the session on the impact of these technologies on the labour market and the real economy. Given the event is now virtual, though, with less need for a traditional chair, I thought I might share a few thoughts of my own on the topic of this panel. It seems like every day we hear of systems and machines that are taking on tasks we thought only human beings could ever do, making medical diagnoses and driving cars, drafting legal documents and composing music, designing buildings and writing news reports. What does all of this mean for the overwhelming majority of us for whom our job is our main source of income? I wrote my recent book, A World Without Work, because this is one of the greatest questions of our time, and I don't think we're taking seriously enough the threat of a future where there's not enough well-paid work for everyone to do because of the advance of these new technologies. Now, I'm not saying that there's going to be some technological big bang in the next few decades after which lots of people suddenly wake up to find themselves without work. That's unlikely to happen, I think. Work will almost certainly remain for quite some time to come. But as we move through the 21st century, I expect that more and more people are going to find themselves unable to make the sorts of economic contributions to society that they might have hoped to make in the past, in the 20th century. And I think this is a fundamental challenge to how we all live together in society. And what I want to share with you in these few minutes is, and in thinking about the focus of this particular panel, is a distinction that I make in my work between two different types of technological unemployment. A distinction I think is particularly important for understanding the impact of machine learning and artificial intelligence on the labour market. The first is what I call frictional technological unemployment. Here, there's still work to be done. The problem is that not all workers are able to reach out and take up that work. And I think there are three important reasons that this might happen. The first reason this work may sit out of reach of workers is what I call the skills mismatch, where displaced workers simply don't have the skills required for the new work that's created by technological progress. And this, I think, is the most familiar reason for frictional technological unemployment, and I won't say too much more on it. The second reason for frictional technological unemployment is place mismatch, where displaced workers simply don't live in the same place that new work is created. It's worth remembering that in the early days of the internet, there was a moment when it seemed like these sorts of worries would no longer matter. People spoke about the death of distance and how the world is flat. But actually, in looking for work today, the place where you live matters more than ever. And the third type of mismatch that I think is important is the identity mismatch, where displaced workers have an identity rooted in a particular sort of work, and they're willing to stay unemployed in order to protect that identity. Think of adult men in the United States, for instance, displaced from manufacturing roles by new technologies. Some say they would rather would prefer not to work at all than take up so-called pink-collar work, a really unfortunate term, but designed to capture the fact that many of the roles currently out of reach of machines are disproportionately held by women, like teaching. 97.7% of preschool and kindergarten teachers are women. 92.2% of nurses are. 82.5% of social workers are. Now, I think most of us tend to be comfortable with this idea of frictional technological unemployment. We can readily picture a world where there's lots of work to be done, but because of the sorts of mismatches that I've described, displaced workers are unable to take that work up. But as we move through the 21st century, I think we may see the emergence of a second type of technological unemployment, one where there's simply not enough well-paid work to be done, full stop. And I call this structural technological unemployment. And I think this idea of structural technological unemployment is a less comforting idea. And the starting point really for thinking about an idea like this, whether it's actually possible, has to be the fact that ever since modern economic growth began, several hundred years ago, people have worried about, repeatedly worried about the economic harm caused by new technologies, and yet those anxieties have broadly turned out to be misplaced. Broadly, there always has been enough work for people to do. And I spent a lot of time in my book and in my work trying to explain why it is that, given the remarkable technological changes that are taking place, this time really is different. That structural technological unemployment is possible in the decades to come. In part, though, I think that this distinction is also useful because it shows that we have to start taking the threat of, or the challenges of, technological change on the labour market seriously now. You might find yourself being suspicious of the idea of structural technological unemployment, but frictional technological unemployment, I hope we could agree, is a far more reasonable phenomenon, something we already see unfolding in certain corners of economic life today. And indeed, and perhaps most importantly, from the point of view of workers themselves, there's not really a meaningful distinction to be made between work that's out of their grasp and no work at all. For them, tales of islands of employment elsewhere in the economy might as well be fairy tales. Thank you very much.